So something that came up earlier, and I found really, particularly from the Science Festival point of view, Bill, was, and I think that would surprise quite a lot of people, is you weren't looking for a finished product when people were putting applications in. But what kind of an application makes you go, wow?
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So I think what we do maybe is slightly different than what some other arts organizations do, in that we, like you say, we are very often looking for a finished product or something that's at least close to finished, because we, fundamentally what we do is we communicate science, but we're fundamentally an events organization. We're trying to put on a successful event. And so we're really keen to showcase something brilliant and something creative and something innovative, but it has to be something practical and sensible and that we can understand and that we can build, and that we have 100 and something events going on each year. So for each one, although we would love to spend months working with an artist, really teasing out what's going to make that piece of art perfect, we just don't have the time and the resource to do that. So something that makes us go, wow, that's going to work, is something where we can really see some thought has been put into the practical kind of delivery of the artwork. So whether that's, if it's something that's on a screen, do you know exactly what kind of screen? Do you know what kind of power supply it needs? If it's going to be like a built piece, a sort of sculptural piece, have you understood, what's the load on the floor going to need to be? Do we need to consider that? Or are we going to need to use a forklift to move it around or something like that? So as to enable us as easily as possible to work with the artist to put their art in front of people. And that's it. We just need to really understand. It's almost, I was saying this earlier to you on the video chat, we almost kind of take for granted that the work you're going to be doing is going to be innovative and thought-provoking and creative and interesting. And certainly from my point of view, I sort of assume by the time it gets to me that conversation's already happened. I want to know if it's possible and practical and feasible. So you have to be thinking about those two things in parallel.
Just because you really don't, the Science Festival is an event that takes place at a certain time of the year, so you really don't have the time to build up a long-term relationship with an artist. You're looking for someone who's got an idea that you can take from here to there and do it quite quickly. But Nicola, your organisation can't it?
Yes, we're in the fortunate position while we're around that we can do a lot of support and discussion and connect people up with more technical people, with more academic kind of contacts with scientists, but can do a lot of feedback and stuff as well. So a lot of what we do when we do funding calls are kind of workshops and conversations and one-to-one conversations quite often to help people develop their idea so that it is a more fundable idea and it is a more feasible idea. So we can afford to take some stuff that is a bit more of a risk because we're trying to support stuff on the basis of it being research and development. So that is immediately going to be more risky anyway. And also because we have a lot of different people applying for funding, we get to do a bit of a mix. So some of the stuff that we fund in a given round will be very solid. We know it's going to definitely be deliverable. And then we'll also occasionally have things that we know are going to be very high risk, but if it comes off, it'll be amazing. And then we basically support to the degree that it needs. So there will be things that we'll pick up on. So sometimes you want to have like a longer ethics chats with people. Sometimes you want to talk about the business model they're going to use, which is important for us, which wouldn't be important for a display of artwork necessarily. But sometimes it's also that the person who's come in really needs to be connected to some very specialist knowledge around kind of data or data-driven innovation or sort of science and technology that they want to work within their piece. So yeah, we are privileged to have the time to do that and to have a really good network of people who can help us to do that as well.
Sorry, I didn't mean to grab it off you there. I know we're getting quite the baton passer here, aren't we? Because Michael, you've got the big bounce in the Institute of Physics, but you've got this open call. So, what is it that you look for in an application that comes in that would make you want to go, yeah, I'll back that?
So with our grant scheme, we often fund projects to be developed, which we then actually host at our festival too. So the two are quite, the two avenues are linked. And what we're looking for is obviously creativity, because what we've seen traditionally is academics trying to put together public engagement projects, which are often quite business as usual. They can lack that innovation in terms of format and in terms of theme that people from the artistic world would come up with. But we also need the projects to speak to what our strategic, aims and objectives are at the time. And usually that is a really careful focus on audience, because what we want to see is, are you working with the right people, and have you considered that for starters? Not just about what the piece is, but who will see it. And then also, what are you hoping to happen with those people? What are you trying to see a reaction, attitude change? Are you trying to see them, make them learn something? So in terms of what the outcome on the audience, that's very prescriptive. In terms of the creative side of it, the weirder the better. In terms of the format, the weirder the better. The impact on the audience for us is everything, and that's the bit that does need to be quite narrow. And so our responsibility is to make sure that's really, really clear on our application guidelines, that this is what we want to see in terms of the impact on the audience and who the audience are going to be as well. So that you as an artist, don't waste your time putting together something that's not for the right audience. But in terms of the creative side, we want things that your average physics professor isn't going to think up when they're trying to devise their public engagement opportunities and projects.
It's a really interesting category, things that physics professors wouldn't think of.
And yeah, I know I'm doing them a disservice, because there are many very creative people in the physics community, but many that are, like to think in the traditional sense too.
Oh no, I've got no doubt, but it's what frightens me as a creative physics professor. Suddenly, what they could come up with,
Yeah.
with the warp drive. But Gemma, you were talking as well about your organisation is looking for cultural shift. So that means that if applications are coming in from artists, you're looking for something that reflects that, I'm assuming. What would that mean?
Yeah, so it's really interesting hearing all the different models which everyone has, and thinking about where we sit, I guess, maybe if you imagine a sort of spectrum. And we do quite a mix of, I guess, the types of outcomes that we're seeking. But I guess a core aim of ours is really to inject, if you like, culture into climate change initiatives, and to sort of harness all of the wonderful skills, ways of seeing the world and practices which artists have in many different forms. And we work with artists across all art forms, and to really bring that into climate change work. So in some cases, that means, so for instance, the Outer Hebrides project, which I was describing, the focus there was very much on community engagement. And so we were seeking artists who have specific skills in designing workshops, building sort of participatory environments, also helping to kind of explore people's visions for the future of the sea and bring that together into a kind of tangible message, if you like, that could be communicated back to communities there. So that had a kind of, I guess, quite a specific aim, which was around engaging communities and helping to reflect that back. We also have a kind of more experimental end of this work, which is actually about embedding artists in a project and trying not to prescribe what they're going to do, and trying to get them in there as early as possible. So at the moment, we're trying to develop a project based in Granton, where you might be aware there's a huge regeneration initiative going on in the north of the city. And climate change is a kind of core strand of how that development is taking place, that it needs to be net zero, it needs to be resilient to the impacts of climate change that we're feeling and will increase in future. So there we're making the case for an artist to basically be embedded in this huge regeneration project, not with one goal, but with a remit to kind of connect across all these different people who are involved in that, from engineers to communities to the council, and to kind of be this node of connection, but also kind of trying to push the ambitions of the project. So it's making links between all these different areas. And so in that initiative, we're hoping that the outcome is not really too preset, that actually the partners and the artists together can evolve a response over time. And I think, like you're saying, we kind of have the luxury of trying to determine these timeframes of working over longer time frames, because I think that's often where you get the most interesting results, where people aren't rushing to an outcome before you've necessarily considered all of the potential avenues, and actually you have that space to evolve a response. But that can be quite hard to make the case for to funders, and everyone's time is pressured, so it's a bit of a balancing act there.
Yeah, that's so. In other words, the word remit is much wider than we're used to seeing in these criteria. Jonathan, I mean, when you apply for things, what drives you nuts about the application process?
I think the fair answer to that is lots and lots and lots of things. I have to say, I actually prefer the application process for science events and funding. I do actually find that the application is a lot more straightforward. There's more about what your idea is going to be and what the outcome is going to be and how you're practically going to achieve it. Art applications, they want a lot of metaphoric kind of description of things, and they also quite often want to hear a lot about your previous successes, which to me seems quite unfair. I prefer applications to be about what the idea is itself and what the outcome is going to be, rather than have you previously had lots and lots of funding. So yeah, that is definitely a good thing about applying for applications in this way. Something I do find quite frustrating sometimes is open calls, if they're too open and they don't actually sort of specify what people want out of them. It is very good as a creative to have that opportunity and that freedom, but then at the same time, it's not so good if you come up with a weird and wonderful idea and it doesn't fit with the venue that the organization are planning on using in the first place. So I think on the one hand, it is good to offer people opportunity to be creative and come up with new ideas. On the other hand, if you know the specifics of the detail of when it's going to be shown or what you actually need, then I feel like that really needs to be shared in the application process. I'd say another bone of contention with applying for things in the scientific community is, well, first of all, thanks to the universities for all the funding opportunities. Secondly, unfortunately, they're incredibly slow at paying, and this can be a real barrier for people. Myself, I was funded by 3 different universities last year, and it was great to get the money and have that confirmed. It took, the quickest one to pay out was 6 months, and the other 2 took 9 months, and that's not untypical. So that is definitely a barrier. I think that's partially due to the way that universities process funding for external people. You have to apply as an external contractor, and that is a vastly long and faffy process. And I'm not sure why it is, or why they're getting away with it, or why other contractors are putting up with this. But I think once you've been through that process, it is quicker, but it is still slow. You'll still be looking at least a month before you get paid out for anything.